Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of Crime Centric. This being a show where I talk about TV shows that are crime dramas. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about The Woman in the Wall, Season 1, Episode 4. A great episode. A lot of really interesting things went down in this episode, so let's break it down. So we're immediately picking up in the aftermath of last episode. The big question is, where is Aoife's body? It's like, well, obviously Lorna and Aoife have interacted. They were with each other, but then the question becomes, like, this was the whole back and forth I had last episode. It's like, there's no way someone broke into her house, which obviously we've seen it's not that hard to break into her house, but gotten into her house, broke open the wall, stole Aoife's body, and then put it back. Like I said, you feel like you would have noticed, like, that replacement. It would have been, like, not solid. Because she hasn't even painting over the wall yet. It's just like, whatever she used to cover the wall, you would think it'd still be dry. I mean, wet enough that you be able to tell, like, oh, someone was here recently, especially considering you've been in and out in your house. But I guess if you're not always paying attention to it. But I'm like, so it still goes back to my thinking of what happened to Aoife then. Maybe Aoife didn't.Maybe Lorna was kind of in and out and she saw Aoife's dead body, but she didn't kill Aoife. She just saw her dead body, and now she thinks, because she's got gaps in her memory, she thinks she killed Aoife. She thinks she put Aoife's body in the wall, but in actuality, none of that actually happened. I don't know. Basically, the ending of the episode, none of that happened. Her finding Aoife's body never happened. Not unless Aoife's body was in her place, but then somebody came and got it before Lorna imagined putting it in the wall. We'll have to wait to see where that goes, because that's going to be the big mystery of whatever happened to Aoife, but Lorna is obviously holding on to Agnes's death certificate, and for her, it's like it's proof that her daughter was alive but is gone, and now she wants to find her daughter's body, because it's like, for her, it's like, this is the only means of closure she can get after all these years. She's never had any closure, and this is her opportunity for it. So she ends up, she tried looking for Agnes's grave in like the local graveyard in Kilkern, and so she ends up asking a priest, who points her towards like the public records office, because they'll have records for all the death certificates and deaths like in the entire county. And that led to a really interesting conversation with the priest, who was like, right, I hope a few rotten apples haven't destroyed your relationship with God. And she kind of ripped him a new one, being like, no, my relationship with God. It's like, are you familiar with Amy? And she was like, Amy told me about this room known as the dying room, when there are babies that are born that were sick at the Magdalene laundry. They just put them in a room rather than calling for help, doing whatever they could. They just stick them in a room and let them just naturally die. That's why it's known as the dying room. And it's like, the fact it says like everything that went down in that place, because even the priest is like, yeah, I'm sorry, Lorna, if even half of what I've heard about what you went through, what you and others went through is true. It's just like, how can you really battle that? We're trying to bring up, oh my God, like, I hope you haven't strayed away from God's like love or whatever, or attention. It's like, well, God did step foot in that place at one point in time, and it's like, yeah, like you can't really do that when it's not even like, these were religious figures. These were nuns. These were priests who put them through that. And it's like, oh, a few rotten apples. It's like, probably not the time to do that. I get it's your job, but even you kind of go, yeah. Even you recognize the wrong move you made when it was all said and done. But she tried to go to the records office, and it's like, okay, can you look for my daughter? But the guy was like, yeah, I can't find it. So it's like, yes, here are the physical records, but all those physical records have been digitized. So if they were any records of your daughter being buried, I would know them. But Lorna's like, no, I need to see that. And I love that. Who does she see as Clemens, especially considering like the two of them connected over their desperation. I mean, there were so many people who were desperate to get their children, obviously, and be with their children, but those two connected, and especially now that Clemens is gone, and she potentially saw her daughter, as we learned from her brother last episode, and now it's just like their past connection and everything present day, how it all ties together. Just it's very pertinent that it ends up being Clemens that Lorna ends up seeing. She even asked, what's her face, the lady that's the lead of that group, who's trying to gather up all the women that have had connections to the Magdalene laundries and mommy and baby homes, just for the purposes of trying to get for using the courts to basically force a lot of the places that were saying like, oh, we were just training facilities and not Magdalene laundries and mommy and baby homes, like trying to get them to admit that they were what they were so they can be held accountable. That, because Lorna had even asked her, like, are you real? And she's like, what'd you say? And Lorna was just kind of like, didn't even answer again. But it's like, yeah, she was asking if she was real because, like, Lorna feels like she was losing her mind, but she kind of is. I mean, you're sleep deprived. You were already kind of going a little wild and crazy without the whole sleep deprivation, like, element to it already, just because you sleepwalking. And luckily the last time she sleepwalked was last episode when she cut Michael with the scissors. I think that's the last time we saw her sleepwalk. So I don't know if she's had any sleep since then. I mean, to be fair, she was kind of tripping balls at the end of the episode when she found herself like surrounded by the same wall over and over again, as her guilt over what happened to Aoife was eating away at her. But either way, when it's all said and done, she sneaks back into the record place after it closes, and she stole some records. And I love, while she's in the process of stealing the records, who did she see? None other than Sister Eileen, kind of like guilting her, being like, oh, naughty, naughty, naughty. It's like, yeah, she was the symbolization of everything you're doing is wrong, you're wrong, you're sinning, you've made him. Like, it makes sense with all this correlation that she would be the manifestation of that trauma. That trauma would manifest itself in that way, is what I'm trying to say. But yeah, she ends up getting Michael's help, which, good on Michael. He doesn't bring up the whole, like, yeah, you slashed up my arm last episode, but it's like, hey, you're asking for my help. And so they go through all the records, trying to find any of all the certificates that Aoife had hidden that Lorna now has. It's like her and Michael split it up, and they're trying to find where any of these children are buried. And ultimately we find out that out of 298, they only found 3 of the children are actually buried. So it's like, where are the rest of them? Because Lorna's thinking like, oh, this might be a mass grave situation, which I do believe, after a little Googling, I do believe after when I did my review of the first episode, I think I talked about it at the time. Like, I remember reading a little bit about one that was kind of like a Magdalene laundry / baby mommy and baby home that had like a mass grave situation. I do believe that is a thing. Because this is where it gets interesting, because, like, well, interesting is kind of a weird word to use, but you know what I'm trying to say. Because I was under the impression, like, no, your child isn't dead. Your child's out and about. They just faked it. Because I thought, because Lorna from the beginning, it made it seem like she thought her baby was dead, but then she thought, like, well, Aoife being in the picture, it's like, oh, my baby is alive, but now she's back to thinking her baby's dead. And obviously by the end of the episode, the revelation of, no, it was right to believe your child was alive the entire time. It's like, especially when you brought in, like, I keep forgetting the place's name, the adoption agency place that's in the middle of all of this, that's connected to the Seven Joys and all that, and especially how this all ties into everything with Coleman, but we'll get to that soon. And I want to finish up things on Lorna's side of things. With all of this stuff, Michael's like, I'm going to leave this town, and you should too, Lorna. Just forget about this place. Give all of this to Massey and let him handle it. But when it's all said and done, because she did bring it up to Massey early on in the episode, but with her being her mind being what it is, he's not going to immediately jump on it. Was her bringing up, like, yeah, the lady pretending to be Aoife's daughter. Yeah, she's still out and about. Still must mean she's definitely connected to the church in some shape or form, or she's definitely connected to all of this. It's just a question of who does she work under. Does she work under Sister Eileen, or is there someone else at play here? Because everyone's doing this like for their self-interest of protecting themselves, but we'll get to that when we get to it in a second. But Michael was suggesting, like, right, give it all to Massey and just leave this place behind. Go back to Dublin with me. But she's like, no, I can't. She has to find her daughter. Because I think for her, it's this, I owe it to her. She's been gone. She's been alone for so long, especially because she's like, my daughter died shivering. She was all alone in this world. And the least I can do is find her. Not only closure for me, but also closure for her, so that she's no longer lost, that she's found. And maybe Lorna's figured that maybe she can find something along that way. Like I said, whether it is closure or some form of whatever comfort you might be able to find in the aftermath of something tragic and terrible like this. But either way, she goes and sneaks into the place that Sister Eileen is, and Sister Eileen's just sitting in a chair waiting. I'm like, I don't know if they have security cameras that caught it. Like, why was she just sitting there waiting in the dark? But yeah, Lorna tries to stand up to her, but sadly, once again, Eileen represents every bit of trauma that Lorna has, and it's like, of course she won't be able to fully stand up to her yet. I think she's going to have her moment, like maybe in the next 2 episodes, but she can't really stand up to her because she's back to being that scared little girl, understandably so, in front of this person who is the literal personification, the living embodiment of all of your trauma and pain. And boy, oh boy, once again, Sister Eileen continued to proving to be the most evil person in this show, where she's gaslighting Lorna, saying like, oh, you weren't, like, you gave your baby up, and she's like, what? It's like, you couldn't find your baby. Like, I said, no, we wanted you to be reunited with your baby, but you're the one that couldn't tell which one was your baby, which we saw that scene. And she's like, yeah, that proved that you weren't a good mother, so we had to step in. And we did what we believe was best for the child, which to me was kind of implying the whole adoption thing, because she didn't want to give Lorna any answers, didn't want to give her any clue. It's like, you see what you've done to her, and you're trying to make it seem like, no, it's your fault. All right, Lorna, you failed your child. You need to start taking some personal responsibilities, you know? And then just like that smug wave when Massey showed up and took her away, it was like, I think I can say it, are an evil bitch. Holy shit, that's just evil, pure and evil. And it's just like, the fact is, you can gaslight someone like that and just be so nonchalant about it. That is pure evil, because it seems like because the lack of guilt is sociopathic. It's like, you are a monster, you know? I mean, we already knew you were a piece of shit because of everything that went down in the Magdalene laundries, but like, it's just the lack of empathy and regret and just all of that just showcases what kind of a terrible human being you are. And so you add that, and just the nature of what you were a part of and what you did. Dude, it's wild. And you had that scene with Massey and Lorna, which I loved so much. He's like, I can't be letting you off the hook anymore. So we're going to drink up our tea, and I'm going to take you back home, and you're actually going to get a bit of rest. And Lorna says, Clemens told me about the time when she actually ran away and got away, and she told me about the time you gave her a mug and tea. After she almost made it to the train station, you got her, offered her some tea, and then you took her back. And now it kind of makes sense. Massey's already made this clearer earlier in this season, but he wasn't clear about his part in all of this. In regards of, he said basically everyone knew, but no one knew. But it's like, they probably did, just they were too scared to act. Once again, I don't know the full reason why you were scared to act, because I guess it's like, it was a church, you couldn't really do much. I guess they just had so many connections that they were allowed to do whatever they wanted to, because Massey was like, what else could I do? Because none of the parents wanted to take their kids back. I don't know if it's a thing of, oh, like, my child needs to be fixed, and they believed in this bullshit, or was it a situation of they were just too scared because the Magdalene laundries and mommy and baby homes, like, were just too powerful, like I said, with their connections and their pull, that, or was it just a fear of, like, you'll be excommunicated in some way, and just like, it just, what could they have really done to you that no one was willing to stand up to them? And even Lorna's pointing out, like, how many girls ran away that you, our local guard, like, took? How many girls did you take back? Because he's like, Clemens would be dead, probably out in the streets and dead if I hadn't done what I'd done. Like, obviously Massey's trying to make himself feel better, but that's also ties into why he has felt such a responsibility, why he like gives Lorna chance after chance, why he talked about Clemens the way he did too, about like, okay, he felt a responsibility because he feels directly responsible for driving these girls back to that hellhole, and it's eating him up inside. And Lorna's like, here's the names of, I found 3 graves out of the 298 names. Maybe this time you can actually do something with it, you know? And just that local Massey space, because it's anger and disappointment in himself of like, how much could I have prevented? how much could I have done if I'd actually did something? So this is your chance to finally do something now. Because even him, it's kind of interesting too, because it's this parallel with earlier in the episode where Massey was like, yeah, I'm like a bit skeptical, so I'm not going to jump on this. And Lorna's like, well, then what are you good for? So it's like he kind of wasn't doing anything earlier in the episode, still hadn't really done anything so far in her eyes. And now it's like, I'm giving you an opportunity to actually do something at this time. So I just love that. The top of the episode, early, at least early-ish enough in the episode with that for Massey, and just to be the end point for him in this episode, I think it's so interesting. So obviously we circle over to Coleman's side of things, where he was sent back to Dublin, and he's trying to figure all this out. He goes back to the crime scene where Father Percy's house where he died, and it takes him back to a memory where he asked Father Percy about trying to track down Coleman's biological mother, but he kind of started getting a little weird and cagey. I'm like, what the fuck is that about? Like, we know you're connected to all this. Like, once again, like, he's directly connected to the Magdalen Laundry and Kilkern, so it's like, it's not that. We know, we just don't know how expansive of a role he played in everything. And he claimed not to know about, what was it, Lazarus House, which is the place that Coleman was born. But the moment he's looking through Father Percy's stuff, he sees a record book, and it has records from Lazarus House, proving he was a damn liar. Because once again, he got cagey and started being like, oh, do you really want to your mom and dad, they took you in. Do you really want to spit in their face? They took care of you. And this person who's your biological mom, who cares? Like, there's no guarantee she would have actually taken care of you. So why go looking for someone that probably wouldn't have taken care of you versus the people that actually did? It's like, yeah, the fact is, you're telling him so hard not to go looking. But also for Coleman, he took that and just like, yeah, sure. Because it's kind of just like how Sister Eileen has so much power over Lorna, and I'm sure anyone else would sadly be under that certain, like any of the girls or the women that were in the Magdalen laundries probably would kind of be in that same boat. And especially but I think Father Percy was kind of that same person to Coleman, whereas like Sister Eileen is pure evil and she put on this front. Coleman is going to believe Father Percy because Father Percy was such an integral person in his life and was so important to him. See, and that's what I talked about before, where it's like, where the Sister Eileen is the obvious evil, whereas Father Percy, it's like, okay, so I did a terrible thing, but upon going past the terrible thing I did good. I tried to be a good influence on Coleman and everything. So does that not justify, but does it even the score? Does it balance the scales in the terrible stuff he's done versus the good he's done? And it's like, I don't think so. It's kind of like The Good Place, where it's like, if you're doing all the good you can do is great if you're being genuine, but if your intentions and your reason for doing the good is just because your reasons for doing it is to balance the scales, it's not doing good just for good's sake, it's to balance out your karma, then it's like, no, you're not getting any positive points. None of your points count because you never did it you didn't do it in earnest. You had selfish reasons. You weren't selfless with your goodness. You were selfish in trying to ease your own sins in the long run. So, and Coleman learns that the Father Percy had a connection to the agency, the same one that's come up beforehand. Father Percy's the one that put put Coleman's parents in contact with them, and that's how they handle the entire adoption process. So he's a lot more mixed up in this than he realized. Because also this ties into the nightmare he had, which his mom said he had it originally when he was a kid, and so I guess it stopped for a long while, but eventually came back. Because the trauma of it all, I think, finally resurfaced because of this particular case, because it was buried so deep. But looking into things, he ends up confronting Father Brendan Rice, who was connected to Lazarus House, because Lazarus House like burned down in like the 90s, which are like, was that an accident? Did they purposely burn it down to get rid of any traces of any evidence that could tie back to them, like a paper trail or something? Probably good chance of that. Not unless it was like an insurance policy thing, but I doubt it. It was probably more so like just getting rid of any evidence. But Father Rice was very, very much cagey about answering stuff, especially when Coleman started pushing him about Lawrence House as well as that adoption agency place, and he starts kind of ripping into Coleman of like, oh, how dare you, you ungrateful, kind of what Father Percy did for you, yada yada yada. It's like, yeah, going on the offensive just shows you have so much to hide. Then basically called his boss, who rips him a new one and is going to take him off the case. Now it's like, okay, obviously you pushed the wrong buttons, but also goes to the point I was bringing up of they have enough pull and connection to kind of get an investigation kind of shut down. So once again, probably plays into why no one stood up to them in the past. Coleman ends up sneaking into the Lazarus House, the remnants of it, ends up crashing down into the tunnels from his nightmares, because we find out the person he was running from is called, it's the title of the episode, what was it, I can't remember it off the top of my head. It's the name of this episode. It's the Cruelty Man, which I initially thought was Father Percy, but then we see multiple times in his dream he runs into Father Percy and he's asking Father Percy for help, but he turns around and walks away, and the Cruelty Man's still coming after him. So he eventually, after leaving the tunnels, outside of his nightmares and stuff, like present day, after escaping the tunnels, he confronts his mom, and it's like, "What, you knew about those tunnels, didn't you?" And she kind of did, because it turns out, much like the Kilkern place had the dying room, the Lazarus place had the reject room, where all the kids that weren't wanted, travelers, non-white or disabled children, were sit there and put in that room. And that's where Coleman was, and his mom never told him, because it's like, what kind of mother wants to tell her child that he was in a room for kids that were not loved, that were not wanted? It's like, that will do a lot of trauma. It doesn't change the fact that your son's already got deep-seated trauma connected to it. So I'm assuming the Cruelty Man connects into it in some place, because maybe, even though he's an adult in the dream, it's probably him personifying himself back then. That was probably when he was a kid. Maybe he escaped the room, and the Cruelty Man is one of the people that dragged him back. And the scene of him seeing like, oh, Father Percy, he probably saw Father Percy. He's like, "Father Percy, please help me." Father Percy just turned around and let the guy drag Coleman back to that room, maybe. Coleman decides to look up the records after he finds out his mother's name. His mother's name is Catherine, and it's like, did you ever meet her? And his foster mom, his foster mom, adopted mom, was like, no. It's like, did she ever come looking for me? It's like, I don't know. So Coleman's going to find answers on his own, and he goes and looks up the records, and he finds something which gets him going back to Kilkern, where he ends up meeting up with Lorna, and shows her his not birth certificate, his death certificate. So he's in the exact same situation. So once again, all this proves that the agency pretended to be shut down in 1979, but it was running like decades later. And it's like, well, all these illegal adoptions, how many could it be? It was like hundreds, maybe even thousands. And I mean, Lorna already found 298 in total. Well, 295. Because 3 actually were dead. But now looking at Coleman's death certificate, and now looking at Agnes's, it just shows like, right, it was all a lie. All those children are out there somewhere. This whole thing was a large-scale cover-up to a whole bunch of kids. So it does beg the question, what about Clemen's daughter? Where is she out there in the world? Is that, like, once again, Clemens knows her daughter was out there, but maybe she doesn't know where her daughter actually was. Like, she had that picture, but, like, without Aoife around to tell her, like, exactly where her daughter is. Maybe even Aoife didn't know. Once again, not unless someone murdered Clemens, but it seemed like maybe she just died just because of just she couldn't take it anymore, just had her heart ripped out and torn apart too many times over the course of everything that was their story and everything that they'd been through. I don't know. It's definitely going to be interesting to see where all of this ends up taking us, what new revelations we find out, what new discoveries we find out over the course of the next episode. The next episode is the penultimate episode, so I'm excited to see what happens next. But really, that's all I want to talk about. Till the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day, and goodbye.